Shane, there's a chance. Oh, okay. It says I don't have sound. Huh. I was just gonna say I don't know if there's a chance that Clark Domingo wasn't on the call because when I logged in from the link that she sent, it had my name as hers. So I
Yes,
thought there was a chance.
that's correct. So that would be me then, Shane. I just tested. That's Nora Jackson.
Okay.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
we're
When we
all sorts of fun.
that's who that is. When she said that, I was like, okay. My name doesn't show up, but city clerk, because I guess that's how she sent the email to us.
Okay, wow. All right, well, Haley, could you please call the roll?
Yes, I'm Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Over to Reed. Smith.
Here.
Lawler.
Here.
Spicer. Williamson.
Here.
And Mayor Atchison.
All right. So items for individual discussion. This is open discussion on DDA, Chamber, and EDC consolidation. We have many members from from all three boards here tonight. And I think we want to move forward and figure out clarity on what our next steps are going to be. Unfortunately, I can't see you to know if you want to speak. So I'm unclear as does everyone know how to raise their hand? Darn it. Okay, so
Williamson, it doesn't look like that is an option to be able to raise your hand.
Okay. Is there anyone that would like to start the discussion this evening? Just chime in.
Shane, this is Scott Evans.
Thank you, Scott.
I guess I'll start out the evening by saying I'm the chairman of the DDA, but also sit on the EDC and chamber boards. We had the last study session. I think some discussion occurred, some follow-up occurred, and then I believe some clarification was received and communicated to the boards that it was their responsibility to kind of move forward with this. So I think tonight's meeting is about, like you just introduced, clarity, knowing our authority, our roles, and being able to move forward and make decisions, have the city support. But for me, it's about clarity so we can consistently move forward on timetables of the board in cooperation with the city. So I myself would just like to walk away knowing what the next steps are to make this move forward and just make decisions the right way and communicate the right way and get the community involvement the right way so we can move forward with this. So I appreciate the city's time to do this, but my goal is to walk away with very clear direction on how to make decisions and move this process forward.
I have one, Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilmember Lawler.
Okay, thank you. Can you kind of bring us all up to speed to how this got to this point? And if you don't mind, I mean, we just got new people, so I think it's very fair that we just bring everybody up to speed, if you don't mind.
Sure. I have not been a part of the entire process, so I want to make sure I defer to the heads of each board. If we could just have a quick recap of how we got to this point.
Well, then I'll volunteer to take that role.
Thank you, Scott.
This was just Boy, I'm bad. I have a bad memory, so I put that on the record. But there was a general meeting after COVID started in March, April, about some of the things that were going on, and a group of people, I see many names on this call that were there, just said, is this even something that we want to discuss? We had Eric and Amy and some board people together, and we knew it wasn't quite the right group, but is this something that we want to consider? And Richard Lindsay provided us a lot of direction on how some other communities had went about it. But it was enough discussion where we said, we want to have another one of these, and we want to bring in the other board members, like Herm McCall from the AEDC and Mark Putvin from the chamber. And so there was this second discussion that we just tossed around ideas. Is this a possibility? So that occurred, and the answer continued to be yes. So then we brought it to the city's attention, and we had our first study session and some discussion. And this is our second study session. After each one of those meetings, the three chairpersons went back to their board and continued to communicate to their boards. And the discussion there was, we're not sure exactly how to do this or where to go, or that there's any kind of decision made, but we wanted to continue to move forward and have this discussion. That's a very high level update, but that's kind of how we got to today. And please, Herm or Mark, please correct me if I've missed anything, or if anybody would like more detail than that. But that's
Okay, thank you, Scott.
This is Herman McCall. Okay, this is Herman McCall, and I currently am chair of the EDC. And I think what Scott described is certainly accurate. I personally got involved in the process probably 5 months ago in a June meeting, and we took, as Scott said, we took it back to our boards to really talk about moving forward with the discussions about the feasibility of this merger and what it might take and what considerations we have to do. And as Scott identified, so that even as chairs of boards or boards, we understand what our responsibilities might be in kind of facilitating this process in terms of what our rights are as board members or as board chairs in terms of making decisions, because ultimately, particularly the city-related boards, we are, volunteers that serve at the, pleasure of the mayor as supported by the council. So even as an example, as an EDC, when we, develop a budget and approve it at the board level, we're approving it to go as a recommendation to go to the council for approval. So just in this process, making sure that we're not overstepping our bound, but doing, due diligence so that we can certainly share with the council and other citizens what we're considering and what we should be thinking. I think the other thing that I would say, strictly from an EDC standpoint and this process, in the last 5 months, a lot of things have changed in terms of even the staffing model and available staffing at the EDC. There have been some changes related to, budget and available funds. We certainly need to consider as a part of the process with guidance from the city, attorney and legal minds in terms of what flexibility do we have in terms of the utilization of funds across those purposes. And while we have a shared goal of being efficient and benefiting the community, we certainly are guided by the limitations and expectations of our missions and purpose. I see a whole lot of flashing. Can people still see me? Because my screen is just going nuts on me right now.
Yep, we can still hear and see you. My screen, I think everyone's screen is changing. They're trying to fix the camera issue while we're talking.
Oh, okay. So again, I think, we have to consider those things, because certainly it was a exciting and intriguing possibility in terms of joining, merging those entities to create some level of shared resources and efficiencies and those kinds of things. But I won't even say but, I will say in addition to that, we have to consider, while in some instances there may be some efficiencies, we want to make sure that we maintain effectiveness as well, so that we don't lose any ground or momentum in any of those individual entities at the expense of creating, this merger. So we want to make sure that it fits well and it makes sense for Albion, and there is some high level of support for what it is that we're trying to do. And as I said, to some degree, this is a moving target, in as much as a lot of things continue to change in terms of available resources, in terms of both financial as well as the human resource. And while we continue to move forward, we will have to determine who might be the most effective personnel to carry out the goals and objectives of the new entity without losing sight of the core purposes of those existing entities. So ensuring that we maximize institutional knowledge, industry knowledge, continuity where we can and where it makes sense, and that. So I will pause there and let somebody else talk for a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question? I'm just going to ask a question because I feel like all the boards have moved forward, have voted to move forward with this discussion. They haven't necessarily moved forward to say we want to be part of this new entity. They at least want to talk about it. I think everyone is really interested in what a new organization or a new entity looks like for these three entities. Is it a question of, I think I have a couple of questions in mind. One is someone has to lead it, right? It has to be someone's job to pull together. What does the framework look like? What does the legal side of it look like? And we don't have to start from scratch. There are other places that have done this, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But it has to be someone's job, paid or unpaid, but it has to be someone's job, right? And I'm trying to figure out. I think that's one of the clarity things I think we're all looking for tonight, is who's going to lead it, who's going to be in charge of pulling all this together, and then probably, in addition to it being someone's job, each entity probably needs to either have a representative or two to put together an actual proper working group to work with whoever's job it is to kind of make sure that everyone's mission from their organization is met, to make sure that whatever new entity is formed is something that makes sense for all three. If that's, or, you know, we decide in this process it doesn't work. Am I on the wrong track, Mr. McCall or Scott or Mark?
I think that's accurate, and I think that's certainly appropriate. I just, as I said, I just want to make sure that we're giving all interested and appropriate parties an opportunity to kind of ask questions, present cautions, and that so that whoever is working on this, either individually or collectively, is not riding off into the sunset, and the council representing their constituents are saying, whoa, hang on a second, why would we do that? That doesn't make sense for where the city should be. And so, you know, that's why I think, you know, this meeting is important, so that, you know, as you hear the possibilities, you can ask the questions or challenges to those who have been working on this. And I think it is certainly the responsibility of the chairs in those individual boards to make sure that we are doing our homework in terms of what questions we have to answer, what we have the responsibility to answer. And in some instances, like I said, working with the city and potentially the city attorney more specifically, in terms of what are, you know, maybe some of our limitations in terms of statute and those kinds of things that will better inform us or guide our direction.
Great. I'm looking for comment from other folks or some input from other folks, some more questions.
The only comment I have, and he's on this call, is Richard Lindsay, and I believe, you know, he has the experience of going through this before. So, and he presented that to us at study session 1, I believe. But as a recap, he could maybe answer your question, Shane, a little bit more clear, because he's been through it and how that organization gets formed and who takes responsibility for it.
And I unmuted right as you started talking, Scott, because I was thinking the same thing. So what happened in Marshall was there wasn't anybody that was particularly assigned to do what Mayor Pro Tem Williamson just said, as far as who was going to lead it. So it was kind of the city attorney. It was kind of, you know, people volunteering services. And it really kind of hurt initially to get things off in the right direction. So there were things that weren't taken care of. My hope would be that you could learn from what Marshall didn't do correctly and have somebody whose job it was to set up these things, because really to ask the city attorney to do it, the city attorney is going to represent the EDC and the city as partners in this, and the DDA. I mean, the city attorney already represents the governmental entities. This is a new entity that's going to be created in a sense by those entities, and it's going to have agreements with those entities. Essentially, there's going to be money coming in. There's going to be service agreements, and then that new entity is going to carry out some of the things these governmental entities are doing right now. And so you really need to have, because I tell anybody setting up a new corporation, because it's going to be a new nonprofit doing this, you need to have a CPA, you need to have an attorney kind of from the get-go and get things set up correctly. So that's kind of my recommendation. And I was just going to say, relative to why this made a lot of sense in Marshall, and I think it would make sense in Albion as well, is it really comes down to silos and people being in their silos. And we all work all the time to try to share information, but it's still difficult to do that. And then this would be an organization that would be very purposeful in gathering those pieces together and then focusing on, you know, the stated purpose of economic development with all the actors. And I won't tell you it's been perfect in Marshall. And again, I think Albion can learn from the things that we did incorrectly and maybe save yourself a year and a half or so of messing around to get to the right place. But I mean, I think it's an opportunity to do some things in a collaborative manner that, and as a couple people have said, how those resources are used. But I'd be glad to answer any questions, any specific questions.
I have a question. I heard from the last study session and since then that there are concerns about public accountability with a consolidation like this, and the transformation of it becoming a nonprofit. And so I'm curious what protections or mechanisms are used to allow the public to know what's happening with public dollars, et cetera.
So from my perspective, it's a balance between the need to have confidentiality relative to development projects and the need for the public to know how the dollars are being spent. So each of the MEDA gets money from the DDA, LDFA, and from the city that are both public bodies. So when those bodies consider what they're going to do as far as renewing those contracts for those service contracts, they can have an agreement. They can have whatever discussion they feel is appropriate. But when MEDA is meeting and when this entity, if it was formed, is meeting, it is a private nonprofit corporation. So it's not subject to the Open Meetings Act. And that's done purposefully because there are issues with trying to have communications with developers that are confidential and doing things in a manner that is what the developers want to have happen. And that is the reason why Battle Creek Unlimited exists in Battle Creek, and while Southwest Michigan First exists in Kalamazoo County. All of those are nonprofit. All of them are run the same way. They're separate entities. It has to be a balance. So the board members, you know, they need to report back. They need to have communication, but ultimately it's not a public meeting, and that's done on purpose for these specific reasons of trying to push forward economic development. And I'll tell you, this has been an ongoing conversation in Marshall. I can give you a list of people that would tell you that it's not being done correctly, and I suspect there will be people in Albion that don't like this either. But there's a reason why it's being done in that way.
Thank you. Just to bring my inquiry full circle, I think that this, if I was hearing Chairman McCall correctly, would be a great opportunity to do some education in terms of what economic development requires, like you're explaining here, and I think that it's really important for Albion. So I have other things to say, but I don't want to, hog up the conversation about that.
So I have a question.
Go for it.
So it's my understanding that no one person is in charge or makes sure that everything is being done in an orderly fashion. However, is that the way it has to be, or can that be a change?
I don't know if it's appropriate for me to speak. I think what I'm hearing and my understanding is that there's questions about who to lead the steps to create the new entity and then to draft the service agreements between the current entities, and then that the new organization would determine how to either hire or staff, whether it would be hiring of a new executive director or some, a way that it's sort of set up that there would still be a executive director or a president of that organization, that the question right now is, you know, before we can even think about, you know, how that looks, who can help these three entities, the DDA, the EDC, and the chamber, to make even a step forward with, say taking Maida's agreement and having each board look at what parts do they like, what parts do they feel like are missing, what parts do they believe don't provide enough transparency, and what would the service agreement to the new organization really look like for the DDA or the chamber or the EDC. I think that in my mind is like, I'm a person who really needs to see, even if we scrap half of what is currently in place, or 2/3 or a third, whatever it might be, of a drafted sort of idea, that at least gives each organization, each board, the opportunity to start understanding what the agreements look like, what they don't like. And that's where I would really like to see coming out of this discussion is how we at least get to that point to go, this isn't going to do it for us. This isn't going to meet what the community is looking for, the direction that the community believes the city needs to go for each of these boards, or to say that this is the start of it and we're going to then make it better each time. So I really want to sort of understand how we can at least get to that state. And does that mean that each board needs to commit a certain dollar amount to contract with a consultant or a lawyer of their own to say, give us the framework of a service agreement that we can start working on and diving into and digesting, picking apart at each of our board meetings, and then move it forward. So that's kind of one of my questions is, you know, does each board need to make a commitment of a certain X amount of dollars with what they currently have in their own fund balances to even sort of begin the process? And then one of my other big questions is, you know, in entering into a service agreement with a new organization, does each board have to bring that to city council for approval, or do they have enough autonomy? Like, is it to an extent that it's beyond, if, you know, if the EDC wanted to consult with somebody on a development project, does that approval need to come all the way to city council to get a blessing and approval, or does that board have enough autonomy to enter into a service agreement? So those are kind of two of my big questions, and I think is sort of a piece of, you know, when we talk about who is going to oversee it, that's further down the road of the overall organization. Right now, I need to understand how we can assign a point person to help take the next steps.
I would agree, and I have similar questions, I guess. Does this initial require, that's where to be honest, I'm unsure of if it requires initial council approval for this initial step. I do understand if a new entity is formed, then essentially the city would enter into a formal agreement with that new entity. With that being said, I don't feel it's appropriate for the city to take the lead on the next steps on getting that initial setup, just because down the road we essentially will need to enter into an agreement with this newly formed entity. I think it's important and critical that the city be a key player at the table in discussions, but to take the lead, I don't think it's the place of the city. And I know when speaking with Attorney Harkness, he did mention that the city attorney ultimately represents the city. So I think the boards would ultimately need to rely on their legal counsel if this is the direction everybody intends to go on, to see how to make this work. So yeah, I guess I would need some clarity on for the initial step if that requires council approval, because that I don't know. Richard, can you share insight on, in Marshall, did they receive approval from council initially, or was that later down the road?
So I think that what happened is the chamber attorney at the time set up the 501c3, got the approval. And so once the 501c3 is set up, you then have an entity that can go to the Albion Community Foundation or whatever funding source and say, we need some money to get this thing started while we do the negotiations. The bottom line is somebody's got to start that process. And I agree with you. It doesn't feel like it should be the city, because the city is going to be a party to it. I'd love to volunteer, but I also have to work at some point. So it feels like you need some money, a couple $1,000s to get this process started, get the 501c3 started, basically have someone that's acting on behalf of the 501c3. And, I or somebody like me can definitely do the agreements, but you need somebody that's kind of the point person for that entity to do the negotiating. And you really need to have, it becomes a chicken and egg issue, right? Because you don't actually have an entity yet, and you're trying to negotiate an agreement with an entity that doesn't exist. So I think it kind of becomes, the city's agreement with a to be formed, the DDA's agreement, with the to be formed entity. And then it's all going to have to kind of be done at the same time, because that money is going to start to flow in, and that money's got to flow in order to pay for the executive director that's hired. You have to find some place to put the people, and maybe it's where you've already got people right now. I'm thinking out loud. So maybe it's to have 2 representatives from each of the bodies sit down in kind of a working committee, with an attorney, with a CPA, to talk about that, figure out, I think the city could potentially apply for a grant to do this, or the EDC could apply for a grant to do this, essentially act as a fiduciary until there's a bank account set up and all that stuff starts. But then you've got to go have a transition at some point where the city's now a party negotiating as opposed to being fiduciary. That wasn't a real succinct, good answer, was it? But part of what I'm focusing on. Go ahead.
It's a bit helpful. I think it's just kind of getting over that initial step. The first is there some general agreement that we should continue to pursue this? This doesn't raise any red flags for people involved in this meeting, where people are saying, no, absolutely, we shouldn't do this, and here are the reasons why. I think secondly, for me, just like the city certainly has its position and its attorney, the EDC, has its operation and its attorney as well, and that we use. But it is kind of as you described, the chicken or the egg, because right now my responsibility is to represent the interests of the EDC. I don't work for the new entity that will be formed. So that's really the piece that I was listening for, and what Richard was describing in terms of, so who and how does that get started, but again, but not going too far where you establish that and then it's not coming together. And so really us being able to identify or come together with a consultant or someone that could take a lead to help keep the process going, as opposed to putting that in the lap of any individual board chair. And as we described, definitely not the city, particularly at this early stage of the process as well. So I'm open for suggestions, recommendations about how folks on this call are feeling about, should we continue to press ahead and make some things happen.
I guess I'll speak just briefly to sort of the question about should it continue. I think in my mind, the alternative to not continuing, it just isn't going to continue to work. You know, we have we have a chamber that is currently struggling to meet, you know, members' needs. The DDA currently and for the foreseeable future will not have enough funds to hire anybody to provide support and development within the downtown district. And you know, in the EDCs, you know, doing all that they can to work sort of on economic development. But that's, yeah, I think that's appropriately focused on new business attraction and not necessarily servicing of current businesses. And I think it, you know, at the detriment of current businesses that are here, especially in, you know, I would personally be feeling very different if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, I'm sure. But I also, you know, was feeling quite similarly prior to the pandemic that I just think that the alternative of which is do nothing and to keep you know, just keep staying the course is just a bad decision. It's just a bad choice. And so I know it's, you know, I think people feel uncomfortable. It's an unknown to enter in this agreement, and it doesn't mean that it's permanent. We've seen, you know, other cities and other communities do it for a while, and as those organizations grow and they need more autonomy, they break off or they, you know, end their agreements with the organization, and the organization dissolves because it's no longer needed. I just don't think that we're in a place where we can say, do we need this or not? As a business owner, we absolutely need it. And so in my mind, it's just, the alternative is bad. It's just bad.
I too would want to hear from others who they want to continue moving forward with this.
Yes, from the chamber's standpoint, we wholeheartedly would support moving forward in this, and the sooner the better, so we can address some concerns and some lack of support and make those changes for the better. So if it's forming a committee with representatives from each and set a date so something can get put down in writing for each group to look at, I think is the most important step right now.
Thank you, Mark.
I have something, please.
Great, Councilmember Lawler.
Okay, thank you. So I think I am on the city council and I am on the DDA board. I kind of want to speak from a question that was brought to my attention about this when we first started these conversations. I do understand that one thing is for sure that we don't have the resources for just one person to lead. I mean, you know, like 3 different people to lead like the DDA, I'll just say it, like the DDA, we really need somebody to really take lead on that, not putting any chairperson down or anything, but we really was missing that employment from that particular group. So I do understand why, as far as resources that we kind of want to merge together, it's just my feeling. I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth, but it's just my feeling. And the question is that will this board like stop the community from participating? So as we go along and we think about a plan and how do we get there to make it look, like we want it to look. I just ask that we just keep the community in mind that, they may not be able to FOIA, are we ready to deal with that? And how do we deal with that? So it's just some of the community things that I'm just bringing to the table because their voices, it does matter, but, I know sometimes we can't help but to wait till a complete project is signed, sealed, and delivered. But that the not being able to FOIA information is really gonna just kind of make them get a complex, if I may say, against us. So if we could just think about some alternatives where they can figure out and find out, what may be going on with their money, what may not, just some information for them.
Can I just address for a second?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah.
So what happens in with MAID, and of course this is subject to negotiation, what this all looks like. The CEO of MAIDA was Scott Fleming, is now Jim Durian, makes reports on I can't tell you exactly how often, because I'm not sure. We haven't had in-person meetings since April, but on roughly a quarterly basis to the city council. So the city council hears that and what's going on. He being the CEO also reports on a monthly basis to the DDA, LDFA, which is kind of the equivalent of the DDA and the EDC and Albion, not exactly the same, but similar. The chamber, we didn't really talk about this tonight, but the chamber marshal was dissolved as a separate entity. And so that really just became part of MAIDA, and that wasn't a public body to start with, so they didn't have a right to FOIA. So there's been a real attempt to report regularly and basically, strongly include the community in the discussions. And where the line becomes drawn is attraction, the things that Amy does with the EDC that really right now are subject to FOIA. And I think Albion's been, as a community, has been really good about kind of everybody collectively keeping their mouth shut when they needed to. But it is subject to FOIA. Things do, when they're not confidential. I mean, there's always risks with that. So Councilmember, I understand your concerns completely, and that's something that you kind of have to balance. And again, Battle Creek Unlimited does the same thing relative to the city of Battle Creek. And I was going to mention also the city of Battle Creek has gone back and forth on what the roles of these different entities are. And BCU in the past has had more responsibility for the downtown, and they pulled that back now, and the DDA has more responsibility. And that changes over time with the leaders and the elected officials and those kind of things. So as was being said, this isn't fixed for all time. This is what makes sense for the community at the time, and can definitely be tweaked as needed over time.
Thank you.
If I could just chime in while we're talking about this, having worked with both of the two cities, Albion and Marshall, I think it's very important for us to highlight, while it ought to be expected that we will do the same level of reporting to our community. We have different needs than Marshall has. A lot of people in our community are unable to meet basic needs. So when we're talking about economic development, it's a different conversation here. I think a lot of the controversy that we've seen in our community has been related to the threats of gentrification. And those are real when we're considering that people have already been displaced from different housing complexes, and the price of housing has already gone up. So when we're talking about, the nature of building our wealth, I think that people want to see things that are for them. And so then when we're removing the public side of this, it definitely, I think, is something that we really need to be careful about unpacking. And my work, just from knowing how, federal dollars operate. I would think that I know all of our meetings are public now, but more public engagement and public input would be warranted at this stage before moving ahead. But I do recognize the need to move forward judiciously from a business standpoint, absolutely. So just think it's important to balance those things.
I just want to chime in here and say, I think in Albion over the last, 9 or 10 months, some have either taken advantage of the pandemic situation and have tried to reinvent themselves, recreate, remove barriers that were there for a long time and try to create something new. I think this is our opportunity here at the EDC and the DDA and the chamber to, fix the things that aren't working in our organizations, improve upon the things. Sorry about that. They're cute, I promise. Improve upon the things that make things that are even that work even better. And I think in all the other communities where they've done this type of work, there have always been big things that have happened. Like in Marshall after Meta, Richard, you can attest to some of the big amounts of jobs that have come to the community after Meta was formed. I think Pawpaw had some of that as well. There are other places where this has worked out really well. And and I want to really speak to Linda's thing. We do have a problem with people who need jobs, who need resources. And if we can create this entity and they can get moving, again, not too fast, but fast enough that we can make a difference, that's just more job opportunities and more employment opportunities for our community. So I guess we've been talking a little bit in circles. Like I feel like everyone on the call is like, hey, yep, this is a great idea. Let's get something in writing to figure out what it looks like so we can kind of rip it apart and see what works or doesn't work, and then come back to council with what could this look like and more discussion. I guess my question is, who's going to do it? Is there anyone who's ready to say, I want to be the ringleader of this process? And I just don't know, is there anyone on the call that is willing to do that or has any suggestions of who we might seek out to do that?
I thought we were considering a consultant or something to try to help us. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's been thrown out there too, but that also requires resources to pay them. So these entities have to figure out how that's going to work.
Yeah, you're right.
And there still has to be somebody to interface with the consultant, and to sort of like take the lead and that. I think, I am certainly guilty of raising my hand more often than not in an effort to help move things along. And so my gut instinct is to raise my hand and say, I'll figure out how to do it. That's also something that's sort of like my best and worst trait, is that I'm willing to try to figure out how to do it, even if I don't know how to do it. And I know that I won't be as effective at it because I don't have sort of the knowledge and background of even the beginning part of some of the city government in this, and the laws and the rules around it. And so it does occur to me that it makes most sense for someone who is, and this is going to be a very sort of like political kind of statement, but a career individual who this is their life's work to help organizations with economic development and community development and that kind of work to make that happen, versus a volunteer on a board within the community. I'm going to spin my wheels in a lot of ways that someone who is, again, a more career individual is going to make progress much faster than I might. Or I'm going to end up being annoying to that person as I ask all kinds of questions that they go, well, yeah, of course, duh. Or don't you know this rule? Or don't you know how this should be set up? I don't want to annoy anybody or waste anybody's time. And so I don't think that I'm necessarily the right person to do it. But I will raise my hand and do my best at it. If everybody feels like it needs to happen, then I'll figure out how to do it.
I have this recommendation to follow up on that. What if the three chairs went back to their boards, asked for a volunteer from each board, so that's the DDA, the chamber, and the EDC, with a goal of creating I'll call it a subcommittee. But I want to strongly recommend to see if the 3 entities could find funding to hire Richard to lead us through the agreement phase. So I don't want to volunteer the 3 chairs of the boards, but we go back to the boards and get a representative from each board and discuss funding to see if we could contract with Richard to lead us through the agreements and get us through this phase. I'll just start there for the discussion.
I mean, it's, I'm sorry, I would like to hear more from the EDC side. Amy, are you with us this evening? I know Chairman McCall shared his insight. Do you have any input that you would like to share, I guess, on what your thoughts would be?
Yeah, I'm here. And I agree with what Scott just laid out. I think it's time that there is a committee put forth. I think the same as you stated earlier, Haley, where you're going to have to be in discussions with these for service agreements. This new entity potentially puts me out of a job. So I don't feel comfortable, nor do I feel like I have the time to spend bringing this entity into creation only to compete for a job or not compete for a job and just be out of a job. So yes, where I have maybe some of that expertise, I do think that a committee that we can assign some funding or find some funding. And I don't know if Richard, you want us, throw out a number so we're not jabbing at the dartboard blind and kind of know what we have to come up with. But I just don't feel that in my scope of work as I am hired to do today, I would be doing a disservice to the community to spend my time on this when I'm already swamped with other work. So, and I'll just leave it at that.
I just to set up a nonprofit, just purely set up a nonprofit, we typically quote in the $2,000 range, which is about $600 just for the filing fees with the IRS. I think that at some point, I mean, I think you should have a CPA involved too. I think something in the range of $5,000 would probably get everything up, agreements negotiated, the entity with the board and with bylaws and with all the things it needs to do to get going forward.
Richard, can you just clarify there, because you broke up just a little bit, just to make sure I heard the right number? You said 5,000.
But yes, 5,000 total. And again, I'm thinking that's filing fees, that's a CPA for some of the work, negotiating the agreements, getting the board ready to go.
I would agree with Scott's proposition that to go back to the boards and ask for a representative to each board to sit down and start putting pen to paper, idea to paper, and get a direction. And seeing how Emily volunteered, I see no reason, as long as the other boards agreed, that she not be part of that process, to have outside person on it. Doesn't hurt to have that opinion and someone that's very passionate about seeing change and progress made in Albion. So that would be my 2 cents from the chamber standpoint.
I certainly support going back to the board and getting support for the financial, assisting with the financial support to get it done.
I'm going to bow out. I've managed to schedule another meeting at 7, so I apologize, but I'm glad to help. Just let me know.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Richard.
I'm the same way, Shane. I got to go in a few minutes if anybody has any questions of me. If not, I got to exit. And
thank you, Scott. Just to kind of recap before people start logging off, though, it sounds like there's like some general consensus here that the three entities want to kind of appoint a committee to work through this with Emily and figure out the way to get resources to pay for a consulting or a lawyer CPA situation, correct? Okay. I like.
When is the deadline?
Yeah.
Oh, Vicky.
When's the deadline? We need a deadline. We need a date for them to get this done so it doesn't keep lingering.
I love that. Mark or Scott or Herb McCall, do you guys want to put a deadline on when we want to have our next steps in order?
The chamber was pending a meeting after this meeting tonight, so I will be contacting the board tomorrow or the day after to set up a meeting, so I could have an answer from our representative probably within 2 weeks, a week.
The DDA has a special meeting tomorrow to do budget, but we can add this to the agenda item to get our representative picked tomorrow and communicate that and move forward.
I'm not sure if Herm is looking for the board date, but the EDC's next board would be December 3rd. And we'd be able to add it to the agenda for that.
Yep.
That's
what I was looking for.
So basically, we want to put maybe a 3-week, maybe by the first meeting of council in December, we'll have that organized, and we can put a little update on the council agenda for December 7th. That's awesome. Thank you. We don't have to stop discussion, but is there anything else that people want to talk about or bring up or some concerns before we move into public comment?
So folks, I just wanted to chime in here. I thank you all for taking the time to gather tonight. You know, it's a lot to ask for folks coming in after, you know, a busy day of work to sit and try to solve the problems that we have. But Emily, I appreciate you stepping up and helping out, trying to find solutions. And Shane and Haley, you can tell me if this would be inappropriate, but I would love to see somebody from council a part of this group. And Linda, since you have so much knowledge on this, you know, would it be out of question to have Linda work with this group to kind of help this move along?
I think that has to be voted out or discussed through council, who we would have be the representative before it's just appointed.
Okay.
You can add it to the agenda of the first meeting for a discussion if you want to.
That would be awesome. We'll do that.
I wanted to say that I was definitely going to be offering things either way, and I see whoever the liaison would be, you know, definitely channeling feedback from all of the members. So happy to, or I look forward to that discussion.
Is there any, if there's not anything else on general discussion, we can move into public comment. Are there any public comments?
No, I do not see any public at this time.
There's a very active dog in the background somewhere.
Active as your children are.
Okay, so with no public comments, Haley, do you have anything additional you need to report this evening?
I do not. I just want to say thank you all for your time.
Any mayor or council member comments this evening?
No, thank you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Okay, is there support?
Support.
All right, and with that, all those in favor? Aye.
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 All right, we are adjourned. Have a great evening.
Have a good night, everyone.